Hello, you wonderful people. Today, I'm going to give you an update and react to one of my older videos on how to get hired as a web developer, no degree, how I became a software engineer. The reason why I want to do this video because my arm is still not good for me to start typing effectively yet, but I also want to share and give you the things that changed from my advice that I gave in the past to what it is now, to show you what has been consistent or what has not been consistent. And the most important thing that I want to say, if you're looking to switch careers, you're looking to get hired as a web developer, don't give up on your dream. Don't believe the AI hype. I'll make a video about why you should not really worry about it at the moment, because the idea is if you want to switch careers into a more of a technical role, like a software engineer, you can still do it. It's just not going to be easy, and it has never been easy. And I'm gonna tell and talk about the tips that I would still give you. And my biggest takeaway, what I don't want for people to happen is you buy into this huge AI hype, and what you do is you quit your pursuit of learning to code to get hired. And when the market improves and there's hiring more developers in the future, you're like, oh crap, I didn't do anything since that time to get myself prepared to get hired. So before I start this video, the first thing I want to do, if you're still looking to become a web developer, a programmer, still do it. Don't give up. AI is not going to take our jobs. AI may change how we work and build things, but it is not going to replace us as a developer. I talked a lot in my previous videos about it. My head honestly is going to blow up because of that. But for now, let's jump into this video and talk about what changed and what hasn't, and talk about how I got hired as a web developer, no degree, and give you an update what's been happening. So the first thing I'm gonna say, I think my head got bigger, my face still looks weird, and I have a different haircut. So very nice. So this video was made about 4 years ago. I think I was 39, about to turn 40. Maybe like this video should be 4 years ago. I don't know why this says 3 years ago. This is so surprised. I'm gonna have to check the exact date here, but let me zoom into the screen, make it bigger, and we'll get started.
For 30, in this video, I want to talk about everything you need to know to get your first junior web development job. Now, this is based on my experience, so take it for what it is, just another guy's experience, but I just want to give you my journey so you kind of get an idea of what it's like and what it takes. Now, before I get into this video, I just want to say that I don't have a college degree. I didn't go to boot camp. I was self-taught, and it was not an easy journey for me. Maybe there are people that in 3-4 months were able to get a job making $150,000 a year, but it was not the case for me. And so I just want to be honest with you about my experience so you could have another perspective of what it takes to get your job. And with that being said, if you're new to this channel, my name is
all right, no one cares about the introduction, but yeah, I still don't have a college degree. I didn't go to boot camp, and I became a self-taught developer. One caveat I will give you, if you're young enough and somehow you found this videos for coding after 30, and if you're able to go to school and get a computer science degree, it's definitely going to help. You know, people that say that you don't need a degree, yes, you don't need a degree, but getting a job does become way more difficult than it has to be. So getting a degree is always helpful, but you could still get a job without it. It just takes massive amount of work and really hard. And when it comes to my 2 degrees, like the thing that you could do, and this is something I recommend to my daughter who's in getting ready to go to school after she gets out of the Navy, is, you know, you can go to a state school for 2 years. They tend to be less expensive. You could get all your random classes out of the way, and then you could switch to a proper university 2 years after if you want to, you know, get some savings. Because in the United States and America, college education is really tough. So if you're able to go to a community college for 2 years and then a state school, that's a great way to save money. But that's that.
Paul, and I talk about subscribing.
Nobody cares.
All right, before I get into everything you need to know, I just want to say that there's a lot to getting your first job outside of just knowing the skills. A big part and 80% of the reason why I got this job is the fact that I always pushed my networking. I went to meetups, I met people. A lot of my friends that I made and started hanging out with were in the web development field. And the way I got this opportunity for my job is I already knew somebody that worked at a company, and they were able to put in a good word to their boss about me. And so when I reached out to them, getting the interview was easy. It's not because of something I did, but it's because I had a good referral, and the hiring manager at the company trusted that other person and basically was willing to give me a chance. So getting to that interview, I would say that part of it was luck,
like
and a lot of it was
I wanted
being able
to
to
pause on the screen because this is still the most important point here. So one thing that I want to tell you here is that getting hired, sending resumes blindly, for instance, if you see a job posting and you send your resumes, right now in 2024, you're competing with a lot of folks that using AI generated resumes. They're sending tons and tons of resumes online. So the resume sending thing is so oversaturated that if you're just sending your resume to a company without any prior connection, that is the worst way to do it, and you probably won't be able to find a job. So if you've been sending tons of resumes and no one has been responding to you, honestly, I think I would not expect any different. So for instance, if I had to switch jobs right now and get a new job and I needed to send a resume, what I would do, I would send a resume and then I would actually contact that company. I know it's like an annoying step and maybe it won't fail, but I'll be like, hey, I just applied to your company for this position. I was just wondering if you got my resume. Call them out on that. And if I can't find a phone number or an email, I'm going to find it. You know what? So the idea is with you just sending your resumes, you do have to be proactive and do follow up and see, hey, I sent my resume. I just wanted to see if you got it. You know, and they don't have to say anything. They could go like, go kiss my butt, like get the hell out of here. They might say that to you. But the idea is if you blindly send your resume without any confirmation that the company got it, or if you get an email back, they said, sorry, we decided to turn you down. You know what? Email them back and ask them, what was the reason why you decided to turn me down? This could help me in my next interview, please, you know, whatever. They don't owe you the answer, but the idea, if you blindly send your resume to the void, which is what you're doing when you called sending resumes, and you don't get any feedback, you have no idea why someone didn't look at your resume. Is it your resume? Is it your skill? Is it what have you? Is it just the fact that they got million resumes and you just got unlucky through the auto detect? It just ended up throwing your resume out. So always follow up, always try to find the answer. So that's one thing that I would add to that. And the most important part that I touch in this video is don't send cold resumes. You need to go to meetups. This is still the truth. It's still the case. You need to go to meetups. You need to make connections. And when you are looking to get a job, you got to exhaust all your friends, all your relatives' friends. I'm sure you have a sister's girlfriend, boyfriend, knows somebody who works in a tech industry, and why not reach out to them and say, hey, do you know anybody that's hiring? Is it a way for you to refer me to that company? I go to a lot of meetups. I met a lot of people, and what's awesome, a lot of people there who work at companies, there's actually some people that have been laid off, and through the meetup, what they do is they talk to each other, and somebody's like, hey, I got laid off from this company. And this guy's like, hey, my company is hiring. Give me your resume. I will refer you to my company. The reason why referrals is super awesome because two parties benefit. You benefit from the fact that you got a job opportunity and you get an interview, and the person who refers you benefit because there's a referral bonus for them. So if someone recommends you to a company and that company hires you, the person who referred you is going to get a little bonus. So that's a win-win situation. So that opinion of mine still hasn't changed. If you're just selling cold resumes, it's not going to work. Always try to exhaust the fact that you want to find someone to refer you to a company. And if you don't have the connection of circle of people that are able to do that, start going to meetup. Get out in public, start interacting with people on Twitter. But I like meetups the most because you build face-to-face relationship with folks, go to in-person meetups so you could like shake hands, you know, and that is your best bet. And I've seen many, many people who literally got hired through referrals. And here's the last point I'm going to make about this. If you're just sending out our resumes and hoping, you're going to be outperformed by all the people that got referrals. Because what happens when a company is looking to get hired, I see it at my company that I work for, they first ask inside Slack to all the people at the company, hey, do you know anybody that you can refer to our company? Why? Because they trust their employees and they trust their employees will give a good referral, and that saves everybody time. So wanted to talk about that point.
Social network and build connections with people that could help to give me a referral or put in a good word for me. Don't underestimate the power of networking. Now, when I got to the interview, I had to obviously prove myself. I was surprised because of the recommendation I got. The interview was more casual and I was asked about my resume and my past experience, but I was never asked about my portfolio. And I think that I got lucky in that sense. And this is why I tell you, getting a good referral to be able to get your first job is huge. So whenever it's possible, definitely take advantage of it. And that's why I still say I got lucky. Now, don't get me wrong.
So here's the thing that I said in this video. This interview for this company called Versus Suite, it was actually very easy interview process. It was all conversational. They asked me about like technical questions, but it wasn't whiteboarding and I didn't have to build anything. The one difference I'm going to say here is that I did get lucky on this interview. It was really awesome. But the thing that I'm going to tell you is that part of getting a job is preparing for interviews. There's lots of different interviews, and I'm going to tell you the interviews that I've done poorly at, and I'm going to tell you the interviews that I've done best at. So for me, any interview that involved data structures and algorithms, I didn't do too well because at the time, that's not something I prioritized. And this is something I don't prioritize now. And so all those companies that I interviewed with that required that process, I just didn't do well. Any company that asked me to build something, or they had like an hour and you sit in front in the office, like, hey, we want you to implement this in code. Those interviews I've done best because that's what I've learned. I practice more how to build things and to showcase my skills that way, where, doing interviews where you just do everything on the whiteboard is not something I was good at. In 2024, what I would say, if you're looking to get hired, do your research of the companies you're applying to and find out what their interview process is, and then take the necessary steps to do the prep for that particular interview. When it comes to data structures and algorithms, a lot of people, like when I watch these lead code challenges, I'm like, I don't know what this person's doing. But the truth is, very common things that people test, a lot of them have to do with like array methods. And then sometimes they talk about certain questions around objects. And sometimes you might ask about tree traversal or what have you. What I would say is just familiarize yourself with the basic data structures. And when you go to apply to companies, look at the type of interviews that they do and prepare accordingly. But again, for me, even this day, I would still prefer doing an interview where they ask me a bunch of technical questions and then ask me to build something, because I still suck at whiteboard interviewing questions. But with that being said, just be aware of that when you apply to companies, and just, work towards your strength. So when I apply to companies and they're like, oh, we have a whiteboarding interview, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go, but probably not going to do that well. And most of the jobs that I got hired, it was usually do a take home or do something on premise. With that being said, though, it never hurts to prepare for interviews and study data structures. The one caveat I will tell you, if you're just starting out learning to code and you can't really build anything, there's no sense for you learning data structures. Because the first thing you want to do is actually show that you have the skill to be able to do the work, like build a website, build a backend, build an API, whatever role that you're going for. And then for interviews, you got to play the game, play the data structure game. But again, I would personally look for finding a company which does either a tech interview where they ask you to build something, either take away home or on premise. That's my caveat here. So back to the video.
Still have my job if I didn't know what I was doing after 2 weeks working there? The answer is no. So you do have to know what you're doing. So the job that I applied to was being a React front-end developer. And when I got to the interview, I talked about my experience, what I've done in the past, and I also talked about all the technologies that I know, which was HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and React. Now, one of the questions that I got at the interview, if I was familiar with styled components and Redux. If you're just starting out with React, maybe you haven't heard of those things, but what I would tell you.
All right, that's old news now. No one cares about style components. No one cares about Redux. But one important lesson here is I actually knew style components and Redux because this is something that I studied at the time, because that was something that was popular. So what I'm going to say is, when you're preparing for an interview or you're learning to code, try to see and do your research, look at companies, what are the tech stack that they're using, and kind of base your skills on that. So right now, I would say React is still popular. Next.js is highly popular. And, you have a bunch of ORMs working with databases, like you have Drizzle, you have Prisma. And when it comes to databases, forget Firebase, forget MongoDB. No one cares about those. I know there's still a lot of tutorials that teach you that stuff. I had 4 separate jobs now as a developer, and none of them use Firebase or MongoDB. So the tip that I'm going to give you, do your research in terms of the tech stack that you need to learn. You can't go wrong with React, Next.js, Node.js, what have you, Express, whatever. And for a database, you're only allowed to do one, is use an SQL-like database. So Postgres is good, MySQL is good. You have to do that first, because nobody else is using, it seems like nobody else is using anything else. And so if you want to prepare yourself accordingly, make sure that you are able to learn the technologies that are used by the company that you're applying. And more importantly, you should understand, even if you're applying for like front-end developer job, and I mentioned this in the old video as well, is you should understand the big picture and what full stack means. So for instance, as a front-end developer, your goal is to create UI that and logic that consumes REST API. And you have to understand how that REST API through routes, controllers, and maybe services talks to the database. And the database is most likely an SQL-like database. And your API takes your request from the front end, and in the back end, it does whatever logic is necessary to make a request to or a query to the database to get the data and serve it to the front end. So the bare minimum is that if you're learning to code, obviously you need to know HTML, CSS, JavaScript, a front-end framework like React. That's something that I still recommend, it's so popular. And if you want to go that next level, well, React technically not a framework, it's a library, but a framework would be Next.js. Work on that. Once you get comfortable with Next.js, learn how to create a project with Next.js that communicates to your database. You don't have to learn like the raw queries. I think it's a good idea to learn how to manage SQL database and learn some basics on how to, query the data, write the data using SQL language. But at the bare minimum, learn how to use the most popular ORM tools. I recommend Prisma. It's a good one now. Drizzle is becoming the most popular. I still like Prisma. If you're still starting out and you're learning, maybe go something to a lower level. There's a library called Connects that allows you to talk to your database and build a full stack application that does basic CRUD functionality where you're talking to your database. So that's, even though you want to be a front-end developer, you do need to have that big picture understanding. And that's something that I recommend.
How to work with Redux. You don't have to be a master at it. I'm not a master at it
again,
either.
I'm talking about old news here. Don't worry about it. I just made my point that just be on top of the commonly used technologies to the job that you're applying. Let's see what's next.
Is that you have to be familiar with the development environment that you're going to work with. And so in our company, we worked in Windows. We used Azure to manage our projects. We had a Git repository. So the second most important thing outside of knowing what you're doing is you have to be familiar in the terminal and being able to use Git and being able to push or pull code, merge code, make changes. It is a very important part of what you are going to do. On top of that, our front-end application obviously works with an API that is connected to a database. So even though I was never asked about this on the interview, I quickly realized I was expected to know how to be able to work with the existing API and the endpoints, but I was also required to be able to go into the database, in our case with SQL, and be able to check the data that I'm writing to the data table by writing queries, being able to look stuff up and see the changes that I'm doing. So if you're learning web development, and you might just say, I'm going to be a front-end web development, that's it. That's perfectly fine. But nowadays, there's no such a thing, just a front-end web development. Sometimes what they say, you're a front-end development, but you should be able to understand back-end technologies, like how to connect to an API, how to work with a database. If you're not doing anything with databases, and the most common one is MySQL, and so you should be familiar with MySQL, the basics of SQL query language, and definitely check when you're applying to jobs what stack they're using. So
like I mentioned just recently, and just to give a follow-up, the most important thing that you could do is to understand the technologies that are used. One thing that you don't think about all the time when coding on your own, especially before you work somewhere, is when you work with somebody else, you're going to be working on a team. And what you're going to be on your team is you're going to work through this process of like using GitHub to pushing your data to GitHub. And the most important thing, you want to learn the basic flow of Git. For instance, instead of pushing to the main branch, you want to create a local branch. You want to make your changes there. Then you want to push that branch, get a PR request. If you are pushing a branch and you want to then merge the branch, you're like, man, I got to make sure that I include all the different changes that somebody else on the team made to the main branch. So learning about rebasing your GitHub branch so it matches everything now that's in main, and then pushing it back, very important. So the idea is when you're working on toy projects, try to follow a GitHub workflow that is very similar to what you're going to do at work. So for instance, although there's nobody else to do your PR requests, you're probably going to be doing your own PRs. But what I typically do is I create my project. If I make some changes, I save it to a different branch, then I'll push that branch, then I'll make a PR request, then I review that PR request, then I say this is okay, then I go ahead and merge that PR into main and go from there. So, and the second thing that I alluded here again, and I just want to reiterate again, anybody that's doing Mongo and Firebase, I get it, it's popular, there's a lot of tutorials, but stop it. My rude awakening at this job, all my prior projects before I got my first job were with Firebase, were using MongoDB. And when I got there, it was SQL. I was like a deer in the headlights, had no idea what the hell I was doing. I literally thought I was going to get fired day one because, like I mentioned, one of my expectations, even though I was a front-end developer, sometimes in your front end, you write a logic that communicates to your API, and you actually might have to check the database entry to make sure that they got entered exactly like you thought that they were. So you should be familiar with using a tool like pgadmin or what have you to take a look at the database that's being written through the logic that you're writing on the front end. And also by better understanding the endpoints and the back end, in our case, it was using oh God, my God, ASP.NET and C Sharp. Not saying that you should learn ASP.NET or C Sharp. It's a good language. I just say if you're going to take one path, pick that path. So if you're going to do ASP.NET and C Sharp, stick with that path. If you're going to do all in JavaScript and Node, stick that path. If you're going to do PHP and Laravel, stick that path, but don't try to do everything at once. If you do Java. It will all get you to the job. It's just a different path to get to the same place. But with that being said, like for databases, you need to be familiar with the basics, because if you're not, it's just going to hinder you in your development.
With that being said, as you could see, it's not just learn HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Nowadays, that is not enough to get hired. So a quick review, you need to know HTML, CSS, JavaScript. One JavaScript framework, in my case, was React, and you had to understand some of the common technologies used in React. In our case, I had to know how to use and be comfortable with React hooks, with styled components, and using a state management library like Redux, which is a lot.
And again, that's old news, but the point that I want to iterate here is that you want to be familiar with the tech stack that your company is using. In our case, they were literally switching from class-based React components to using hooks, and that was like the cool thing back in the day. So me knowing those things made me stand out as a candidate. So definitely be on top of the frameworks that the company that you are applying to is using, because it's going to help you. And the fact that I knew that, how did I know that? Number one, because I looked at the company before going to the interview. I looked at the company weeks in advance, and I prepared all my talking points. I took a look at what technologies that we're using. They didn't list all of them on their website. So luckily, the friend that recommended me to that company, I literally blatantly asked her, can you ask her developers, like, what are all the things that they're using? So I could familiarize myself and make sure that that's exactly what I was looking for. So very important, as much research you could do ahead of time before you apply to a certain company, and change your resume based for the company. Like for instance, don't have the same resume that you sent to a different company. Your resume should be rewritten in mind of a specific company that you want to get hired. So make sure that you're really showcasing that you are the right person for the job. And of course, getting in the door, you should be being referred to that company.
And on top of that, I had to understand how to connect to our API, and I had to be able to see the changes that I'm making in the database by going to our SQL server and doing query search on the table, finding that table that I wrote the data to, and being able to see it. So that's a lot of things that you guys had to know. On top of me getting a job, there was one requirement that my boss told me. He said, look, I'm going to hire you, but on one condition: if you're willing to learn C# so you could start working on our backend API. And I think in my case, because I was applying to a smaller company, most of the developers there, they were full stack developers. And so part of my requirement to keep this job is to start learning ASP.NET and C# from day one. Now, this might not be your experience. You might be getting a job at a bigger company where, you're just going to do front end. But what I want you guys to know, there's no such a thing as pure front end anymore, or pure back end. You might be pure front end, and what that means is that you understand and you work in the front end, and that's where most of your experience is, but you also understand the back end and the API, how to connect the API, and you understand basic knowledge working with databases. Where same thing, if you're a back end developer, it doesn't just mean that you just spend your life in that back end. You understand the front end enough in the context that allows you to do your back end work.
And I think it's like the experience they had in the smaller company, I think it's more of a thing nowadays where majority of developers are, regardless if they call themselves front end or back end or full stack, you have this big general picture where you played around with all the technology. So I might be a front-end developer, which I am still, believe it or not, a front-end developer, but I do have familiarity with back-end, how to make APIs. With Node.js, I've also done APIs with ASP.NET, with C# when I worked for that company. And you should understand the big picture and kind of know how your role is tied into that picture. So that is why getting your first job is very difficult, because there is a lot that you need to learn, like in order to be considered junior developer in my mind. And my path to getting my first job was very hard. But the one caveat that I want to give you, and I'll talk more about at the end of the video, is that with every job that you work at, and I worked in this role for 1.5 years, you're building experience, you're building trust factor, that getting your second job becomes a little bit easier, getting your third job becomes a lot more easier, or a little bit easier, and that just leads along. And so I talked to a bunch of people that got laid off, and some of them were like, man, I got laid off and I got to get another job. And some of them was like, yeah, I got laid off. I'm going to go on vacation to Mexico for a month, then I'll come back, I'll start looking. And so what I found from experienced developers, yes, they got laid off, but that they were able to get new jobs. And I know that in today's market right now, they're like, oh, it's so hard to get a job. It's very difficult. The fact of the matter, I went to the last meetup I went to, there are still people that got laid off, but there are people there who got laid off before, and now they got hired again. And again, like it's web and flow. Sometimes the market is good, sometimes the market is bad. People will get laid off due to trying to meet the goal, like company, like quarterly reports for investors. And a lot of times you got to cut costs, and they're doing it usually by laying off. Every company I worked for, by the way, just to kind of put this at rest, is every company that laid off people ended up next month or the next 2 months hiring more people back because they need people to do the work. And so this is a normal workflow in the industry where people get laid off and people then get rehired. I just recently talked to a friend of mine who's way older than I am. He is about to retire. He's been in the tech industry for 40 years. And he said, over my career, I've been laid off many times and I got hired many times. So it's not an easy process. There's always difficulty around there. And it's hard because you don't have a job, but it is a normal process. The last thing that I want to add to layoffs and the context of it, a couple of developers I talked to, this one guy who said, I'm going to go on vacation and take a month off. What he did is he saved a bunch of money. He had an emergency fund where he has a bunch of money to pay his bills for next like 3 months or so. And he's able to afford to take that time off. Now, if you've been living paycheck to paycheck and you get laid off, that's scary as hell because now you can't pay your bills. And so the issue is not that you got laid off, is that that's a money management issue. I don't want to talk too much about it because for some people it's a touchy subject, but if you have money in the bank saved, you can afford in between jobs. And that's something to consider when you're working. And I know if you're not making any money, it's hard to save. If you're making little money and you have family, you have debt, you have this, it's hard to save. But one thing that I'm learning as being an adult, and I was never good at this, and I had to put systems in place. Making money and having money are two different things. I've had a job where I made a lot of money to where at the end of the week, I had nothing left. And I had a job where I made $45,000, but I really figured out how to live below my means, not spend money like crazy. And I was able to be happy and fine. So working and making money and not money planning are two different things, but they do make your layoff easier if you have it. Anyway, I don't know why I talked about it, but maybe because I felt like it's an important distinction to make and talk about it.
There's a lot to learn. And for some of you guys listening to this, you guys are going to be overwhelmed and be like, I'll never learn this. And that's something that I thought I will never get to a point where any of this makes sense. And my first 2 months of my job were very difficult. And I had to come home and spend all my waking free time trying to figure out what I was doing. And after 7 months working at the company, I still don't feel like I know everything, but somehow I'm getting my work done and I'm meeting my requirements. So if you're just starting out and you're learning and you're trying to get into web development, I just want you to have an opinion. And again, maybe it's much easier than my path was. And I don't know, but this was my path. But I want you guys to have realistic expectations and to understand that it's not as easy as, doing something for 3 months and expecting to get a job where you make $150,000. Listen, it didn't take me 3 months and I'm definitely not making $150,000.
So the most important lesson here is that getting into the tech industry is hard. And it actually takes a massive amount of effort. And sometimes what happens when we put in some effort, we might feel that we're putting massive amount of effort. And when we don't get the result, we don't get the callbacks, we feel like, oh, this is no use. I'm just going to quit and do something else. But the truth is you need to persevere. You need to keep going. And over time, you will get to where you want to go. A lot of times I went to interviews, I used to say to myself, it's because I'm too old, no one's hiring me. No, nobody hired me at the time because I didn't have or prove the skills that I'm able to do the work that I can. As I continue learning, got better at development, people are like, oh, Paul has a skill that we are looking for and we are going to hire him. So the point is you need to continue moving forward until you get hired. A lot of people quit way too soon learning to code or quit looking for a job because the truth is it takes a long time and you should have those expectations like, hey, this is what I signed up for. If you want to be a developer, you want to make slightly above average that most people make, you need to put in the time, you need to put in the sweat equity, you got to work for it, and it's not easy. And to me, I just said to myself, I'm going to keep doing this until I get hired or die. Those are like two of my options. So I didn't really think of it like, oh, if I do this for 6 months and don't get hired, I'm going to quit. I'm just going to say, I'm going to keep doing it until I get hired. And here I am, I got hired. And now 4 years later, almost 5 years, I'm still working in the industry. And so the fact of the matter is, if you really want it bad, keep moving forward and you're going to get there. The one example I shared here is that when I got my first job, I felt that I was drowning. I didn't understand enough. And unfortunately, I did have to spend a lot of time outside of work to make sure that I fill in the gaps in my knowledge as quickly as possible. And that was the reality for me. And it might be reality for you when you get hired.
But at the end of the day, I just want to say it's well worth it. And I'm so glad, even though I'm 40 years old now, I still think about it that I have another 15 years to devote to this position and to devote to my love of coding. And you really have to love it to do it, because it's almost 1 a.m. here and I'm making this video talking about coding. And after I make this video, I'm probably going to spend another 2 hours learning new things, something that will help me to continue to increase my value as a developer.
Jesus Christ, nothing changed. I still stay up late like an idiot trying to learn whatever thing because I constantly struggle with the imposter syndrome that I feel like never goes away, especially if you're a self-taught developer. But the truth is, if you want to continue making it in this journey, part of your sacrifice that you're going to be making is this never-ending journey to learn. And this is one of the reasons I love this industry, is because there's always new things coming out. And if you get good at those things, you already catch up to most of the people that may not know how to use that technology. For instance, back then, React was still fairly new, was still very popular. So for me, learning React, like it was like I had just as much experience React as somebody else, because React only been around for like, I don't know how long. But the point is, the cool thing about this industry, and this is why like I don't worry about like AI taking their jobs, is because with every new day, there's something new comes out. There's a new way of doing it. There's a new process. There's a new framework. If you learn that thing that is in demand, you're going to get hired. So at any given time, you could come into this industry and just start focusing on the most in-demand skills. And one example for me now is AI is becoming like this huge thing. So I'm trying to practice integrating AI in some sort of way into any of my projects that I learn. And this is one of the reasons I started learning a little bit Python for scripting, because there's some AI libraries that are just easier done with Python than JavaScript. And so my goal right now is learn how to build AI-powered system like RAGs and stuff like that to kind of help myself to continue grow as a developer, to make sure that I have some more value to provide, to my future employers or potential hires. And so that's one thing about this industry, is that you have to constantly continue to learn. There's never a time when you're just going to sit and be like, okay, I know it all. All I could do is just sit here and collect the paychecks. That does not work and does not happen. So if you're looking to get into this industry, this is something that you have to be like okay with and be like, that's it. I am a continuous learning type of person.
And if you're not the type of person that is able to constantly keep learning because you feel like I want to learn something once and just reap the benefits of it, that's not how web development or programming works. It is constant learning every day because technologies change. So if you're looking to get into this career for a quick, easy money, it is definitely not easy. And I would argue there are probably some other jobs that you could do that will be a better fit. But if you love it and you find joy and feeling of accomplishment whenever you solve a problem, then this might be for you, but it's definitely not for everybody. And I used to think that anybody could learn to code, and I think anybody can learn to code, but not anybody could sit in front of the computer day and night typing away. It might not be in your personality, so you really have to enjoy it. So anyway, I hope you found some value in this video, and I'm just babbling on because it's late. I'm tired.
Yeah, stop
and maybe
babbling.
one day that's going to be me, but
Stop babbling, good enough. So the last point that I'm going to make here. So that's me 3 years ago talking about my first job. If you go back farther in this YouTube channel, you're going to find me talking about coding and things that I'm doing before I even had a job. And the whole point and the reason why I started this YouTube channel is because I wanted to see, is it even possible to get hired as a developer? Number one, being older. Number two, like, is the YouTube hype when they were telling you could get a job in 3 months for real? Like, was it like as abundant? Like, it took me 4 years to get hired. Just put that into perspective. I started learning to code 4 years after I got my first job. So it's a hard process. And so am I saying that there's no jobs, AI is going to take everything? No, it is not. I'm just saying that AI, don't worry about it. If you really want to break into this industry, just do your work, start coding, build projects, build your network, go to meetups, get interviews through referrals rather than just sending your resume, and keep pushing forward. And eventually you're going to get hired. The last thing I want to say is that the world is changing. AI is here to stay, but AI is not as magical as people think. And it is not going to replace all jobs, all developers, what have you, but it is going to affect how the space looks like. And so the tip that I would give you is, as you continue to learn your coding and development, when all these new technologies come out, always ask yourself, how could I benefit from it? And how could I use them to be more productive? And the most important part is to understand them well enough that you could tell their shortcomings and know where they fail. So if you ask all the developers, is AI going to take their job? 95% of them are going to say no. 5% of them just don't want to have a conversation with me. But none of them going to say like they are afraid. But if you talk to people who are not in the industry, people who are just trying to learn to code, they're watching all these YouTube videos about coding and how people getting laid off due to AI and how AI is going to ruin everything. They're getting this fear mongering because that content works on YouTube, and people just want to get views on YouTube. So they're going to tell you some wild shit. I mean, like, seriously. And so the point is, you need to be able to understand where the hype begins, where the hype ends, and know where you fit in. I think if you're looking to jump into this career to become a developer, do it. And there are many reasons for it. But one thing that I'm going to tell you is that being tech literate will open up more job opportunities, even if they're not in like software engineering directly. There's so many other opportunities and jobs. And you could apply to any one of them because you are tech literate. And obviously getting a job is not guaranteed, but listen, if I had to start all over again in 2024, I would still do the same steps that I did. The only change I would make, and so to prevent me from taking 4 years to get my first job, is don't try to learn everything, focus on one tech stack. I should have just focused on React, JavaScript, Next.js, the big three there and move forward. But instead I tried to learn C++, C, Ruby, Python, everything. No, just get good at one thing before you could learn the second thing. And so that'll be my only thing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you want to see more of these videos where I talk about some of the old content that I made and talk about what changed, what stayed the same. To me, this was kind of cool. Brings back a lot of memories of me spending time late at night trying to learn to code, to make this thing happen. And it's just so awesome to see that the fact that here I am having this YouTube channel as someone who's been in the industry for almost 5 years, to watching myself on YouTube where I just got my first tech job, and knowing that before that I was literally making videos about getting hired and how it sucked from my car before having a job. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed it. I see you in the next one. Bye, everybody.